Hello, everyone, and welcome to the launch of Swivelmount by Ken Babstock. I'm Elena Wilcox from Coach House Books, and thanks to all of you for being here tonight, or I guess not here, there, wherever you are. Thanks for joining us. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that Swivelmount, the book, was produced in Toronto at the Coach House, of course, and that Toronto is traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat, and is now home to many diverse nations, Inuit and Métis people. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So welcome, and we're going to have readings from three brilliant poets. I'm excited to hear them myself. And just a note that if you want to ask any questions of the readers, they'll be reading each for a brief period, and then we'll have a conversation with the three of them. And if you have any questions, just put them in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll hopefully get to as many as we can. And that the authors, the books by the three authors reading tonight, they're Coach House books anyway, will be available on our website, chbooks.com, for 20% off for the next 24 hours if you use the code Swivelmount, all caps. So if you like what you hear, please support the books. So our first reader is going to be Matthew Tierney, author of Midday at the Stupor Kamiakandi. Matt is the author of three previous collections of poetry, Full Speed Through the Morning Dark, The Hayflick Limit, and Probably Inevitable. He has received the Trillium Book Award for Poetry, the P.K. Page Founders Award, and the K.M. Hunter Artists Award, and he lives in Toronto. Andrew Zawacki, author of Unsung. He is the author of the poetry volumes Videotape, Petals of Zero, Petals of One, Anna Branch, and By Reason of Breakings, as well as 4 books in France. His poems have appeared in The New Yorker, The New Republic, The Nation, and elsewhere. With fellowships from the NEA, Centre National du Livre, and French Voices, he translated Sébastien Smirou, My Lorenzo, and See About. Zawacki also edited afterwards Slovenian Writing 1945 to 1995, and edited and co-translated Alesh, I'm not even going to say that, Without an Anesthesia, New and Selected Poems. A recent Howard Foundation Poetry Fellow, he is professor of English at the University of Georgia, coming to us from Georgia, and I think people from around the world are thanking all citizens of the state of Georgia, so thank you. For the election, I mean. And last but not least, the man of the hour, Mr. Ken Babstock. Ken won Canada's inaugural Latner Writers' Trust Poetry Prize in 2014 for a body of work in mid-career. His 4th collection, Methodist Hatchet, won the Griffin Poetry Prize. His previous collections include Mean, winner of the Atlantic Poetry Prize and the Milton Acorn People's Poetry Award, Days into Flatspin, winner of a K.M. Hunter Award, Airstream Land Yacht, winner of the Trillium Book Award for Poetry, and On Malice, written while in Berlin as one of the DAAD's International Artist Residents and published in 2014. His poems have been anthologized in Canada, the UK, the US, and Ireland, and translated into Dutch, German, Serbo-Croatian, Czech, and French. Ken Babstock was born in Newfoundland and lives in Toronto with his son. So I'm going to pass things over to Matthew Tierney. I look forward to hearing the read. Thank you, everybody.
Hello, everybody. Sorry, a little explanatory gap there. I'm very happy to be here and help launching this book. I was very honored to work on it. Ken had asked me to maybe read a poem of my own, something that would pair well with a poem of his. And I actually went through some of my newer work, and I'm still, for people of a certain vintage, I'm still really look up to Ken and still working under his shadow in a lot of ways. And so I landed on this poem. It's sort of Babstockian in many different components. It's these splintered sonnets that I've been writing, sort of like smash sonnets. And I'll read that one and one of Ken's, and then pass it off. This one is it takes place when I was 12, maybe. My brother and I, we were unfortunately killing a fish in a field. It's called "How Long Until One of Us Dislodged the Eyeball." Abandoned cow field uphill past cottage rentals. Agglutinates in the brushwork thicken the episode to agents and evolution, threat, sun, scale, country fence, shield, spasm, mask, debt, not wanting to. Absent idea beyond what emerged dumbfounded from the cave of the other, younger cousin, brother. Like the charging bull that rumor conjured. I bring to life a small mouth bass, creation in the heave to shock it off the altar. A stickiness in the combination turns ever heavier rocks. So I chose, there's a poem, I believe it starts the third section, Ken. It's called "I Am No Pilot Yet." It's taken, which is something that Romeo says in balcony scene, in one of the balcony scenes with Juliet. And I love this poem for the way Ken has a way of unfolding a narrative, unfolding the process of getting from A to B. And this poem seems to capture that perfectly for me. I am no pilot yet. It resembled a city insofar as the streets' scales blistered, projecting emergencies tricolor over facades, upturned fruit boxes, ivory gowns, and the gurning skaters who heft their broadswords among the flock of screens bouncing between bank towers. We say, when we must, the small hours to indicate dimensions such that nothing much could have happened within them. They were simply too small. We forego saying consequence. We'll pass through that anyway, just as we pass through nights into a newly illuminated balcony scene, a Japanese maple's shade, turning the gazpacho the shade of Japanese maple. Or city has nothing to do with the poem, and it's not me on foot, headed west, believing west to be exactly south. The sky changed in the interval, black tea to congealed grease, here it comes, the subjective, with strips of darker vapor marshalling energies in the distance. Let's just say the sky changed. That intervals went unlogged. I know for certain I thought I'd been of the opinion I'd left the apartment in boots. When I have my hair cut, I am materially different. When I forgot someone entirely, I was indifferent immaterially. The front edge of tomorrow's weather might be this yellow donut-like tired people so often start yelling in, despite the sprinkles. If I eat my father's watch off my own wrist, can the stars, not being there, stand as hard evidence of insect divinity? Can thaw not mean thaw? Thanks. So I'm going to kick it over now to Andrew, who's going to read a few poems as well. Thanks for listening. Andrew?
Thank you, Matthew. I'm delighted to be here to help launch Ken Swivelmount. This is an amazing book, so it's an amazing night. I had the pleasure and the honor about a half a decade ago of editing Ken's book On Malice for Coach House. And that's a book, as all of you know, or most of you know, is filled with found language and repurposed language from other texts. And among the palimpsests in that book of Ken's is a notebook that Walter Benjamin kept of his son Stéphane's coming into language. It's a notebook that has a French title. It's filled with kind of malaprops and efforts at correctly pronouncing words. There are all kinds of interesting neologisms in it. I was so taken by the one or two phrases that Ken had used in his book that I went to that notebook myself while I was trying to write a poem for and with my own daughter at the time, who was growing up into French and English both. And so the poem I'll read of my own tonight is called Gratofof, which is an anagram for the word photograph. That was Stefan's effort at saying the word photograph. And this poem is comprised entirely of lines that are not my own. And Ken is thanked in the back here for providing me permission to rip him off, in addition to ripping off Walter Benjamin. Gratofof. This is not a waiting room for souls. It is modern, totally unwindowed. The sun threw a ray away, lost 2 rays. It's raining here in the room. On the beach, it looks very evening already, money removed from the world. If one travels somewhere and back again, one is always different. We are not separated on the journey. My mouth keeps springing open. Everything does not have to have a limit. Varnish out, door year. Winter ice is caught in winter. I plunged myself, but not under. I can't pull it out of my head, can I? God through, a word with a star tied around it, it has to hit someone. With such a storm, the trees fell over. There was a storm against. I have got a lot more songs in my mouth. Shutter horror, soul doll, shiverbeard. Is there much enough snow? Is that supposed to be lakes for the chessmen have reached the bank? Mother shakes the little tree. Otherwise, the darkness will read it and will remain dark forever. A dream falls off, a little shirt. The sky is red and blue. How do the bones get into my foot? Ung train, puff train, affraided me away. No, everything does not have a limit. I saw that I lived here, that there is a spider in the window here, that there is a mirror here. Twins light, the tongue, the garden flowers painted, almost you. To walk where it is very dark, and the small bell is already hanging in the air. The poem from Swivelmount I'd like to read is called Single Cell. It's the poem that contains the title, Swivelmount, and now I've just lost it. One of the reasons I wanted to read it, in addition to the fact that it contains the title, is that I love how it sort of sprawls across the page and airs itself out as it goes. It looks like this. Single Cell by Ken Babstock. If an ass comes to in a holding cell, midway between late thin sun and a daytime moon, between vibrations of clock cages and being concussed, absorbing the puce tones of industrial gloss on the breeze block walls, what impetus has he to take the form either of a bull or a butterfly, the bear in den or the Slivovitz, Buren's drowned or the foxfire light, Apollo's crimson beeves? When you arrived lit up, you were machine. I want to help you, but I, like other gods coming good on lost wagers, doing a stint among the asphodel, taximeters, red dirt, feigning affinity for tumbling seas, launderettes surviving on dead blocks, and a worked up furor when plumplings suffocate, must first fall between stools in the silvering realm. You'll know then I am present to you by thunder and by cameras on swivel mounts. Neither the ass nor the razor wire appears in any extant writings. Security tape is a TV trope, like the threaded glass in the single portal through which you see cyclones, no, pheromones, making wet runs in black nylon. The sun's just a hate rag, blotting striations of cirrus, cross-sections of a disinterred skull, looking for ground meat or low fruit in the brain's laterality, hair whorls and handedness, excitability in one gene's on switch. Kinks in the ruts lining the approach to the road here, where to die of hunger is to prove another's conjecture and be thirsty still. I give you Ken Babstock.
I knew I'd have to be coached to do something. I'm started now. Somebody let me go that, or let me know that I'm up and going. Yes. I believe I'm happening. Yes, good. I knew it would be me that would mess up the technology. Very sorry for the pause. Again, my God, I don't know. I already am overwhelmed with trying to say thank yous. Matt and Andrew, what astonishing readings. Can we just stop now and start chatting? Also, need to fit in the 1,000 thank yous, everybody at Coach House, from Alana and from Matt, who edited this one, Andrew, who edited the previous one, and everyone at Coach House who had a hand in creating, well, such a beautiful book. Everyone knows Coach House enough to know now that the books as object are almost too beautiful. And so I'm just bowled over and have to thank everyone without ever remembering everyone's name, and even also my son and Helen, who are in the other room. I hope, well, either he's watching or he's playing FIFA 20, who knows. I'm going to read just a couple of poems and then hope to get the men back for a bit of a talk. So I won't waste too much time with preamble. This poem is called Power and Privilege. Don't believe I need to say anything about it other than that. Power and privilege. Not to wet the sand under your capacity to know your own mind, or point to solar flares at the appearance of the rainbow ball. But are you sure you're all right being in love with me? Because I'm not all that functional or wise or anything. Closest I've come to watching Night of the Hunter was reading an account of Lana Turner pissing on Robert Mitchum. I've only just begun banking online. No one ever includes the freeze response alongside the other two autonomic ones. Like biopics of writers, it's low in action. Drool not being big at box office. I didn't go to school anywhere, never mind Stanford. I worry. It's worrying. You fell in love without necessarily inspecting all of these questions. I know I'd be best served by talking myself somewhere, like Christopher Robin, somewhere a friend lives, within their means, stuck in their own doorframe, or expecting diminishment as more of their lot. They spent the pages together, didn't they? Obeying the narrative, jumping in with a quip now and then if the weather got up, or one of their crew peeled off into their particular obsessions, giving everyone else something to mull over. As Disney bled into my earliest, we've all had that nail through the soul breach the flesh, then endured the tales of typhus, the dear old diphtheria. One or the other, going by its street name, stood over the drain grate, kicking the buckling tarmac. My brother said cocaine can give you lockjaw. Like the rest of the world's bits, people either connect or they don't. It isn't for me to intercede or force the issue. And look, the chimney pots of Sarajevo are the city offering the assembled mountains endless cigarettes at dawn. I burned ants as a boy. The sun can be narrowed to a blade. Still, the patriarch in the Melrose novels, applying the red end of a cigar, made me vomit. It's in the telling, isn't it? We locate power on a low stone wall under a fig tree. We do it all day, every day, until we can't see. We do it with a belt between our teeth. Did you wake to a world vibrating off key, sick at the root, pale and untenable? I'm going to slide the window shut so that the Gardner Expressway doesn't, sorry, not the Gardner, the DVP doesn't drown out the next poem. DVP has its own prosody, but it's not for tonight. This poem's called The Plural of Unconscious, or Painting the Fourth Bridge. I think it was a thought I actually had on my own. Did I one day say out loud, what the hell is the plural of unconscious? Is there such a thing, the plural of unconscious? Unconsciousness? So I went and looked. Single example in the OED of its use being owned, at least, by a volitional subject is Norman Mailer, of all people, havering, but that may be my unconsciouses speaking. Living 10 flights up, the sky's traffic comes to displace street level stuff. The Raptors, bush planes, passenger jets, pigeons, and orange fireballs northeast to southwest over Scarborough. They activate the canvas's upper third. Enviably chalky northern light rinses the middle strip, and children's screams, deprived as they are of transitional objects, buoy up the base from down here. We've learned in the past, haven't we, to mark how usage warps held belief. Warped or mistaken usage bakes belief into the user as raisins into despicable loaves of malt bread. Unchecked, we're eyeing the Bedouin in the cassoulet, tying flogged friars to a bull's rack before salting the tinker's dray horse. Chiellini, not Kino, has the face of a condottiere. Roy's is that of a gallowglass, as a friend put it in her keynote at Key's College. Who doesn't enjoy putting Alan fucking Bennett in his place? Lemons weigh green on lemon trees between Monterosso and Rio Maggiore. Olives in ground nets. The Via dell'Amore, taken by landslide in 2011. Small losses. You may feel in your infinite jump glitch, time is on your side, but have a look at Rod Stewart now. Where are the faces who tore at our youth as hawks into possum? Not vacationing on the Bosporus, I'd wager. My brother contracted scabies, leaving the ringworm to me. Shocked twin chimps opening green hymnals until service let out. The green bled out. Gram stains IDing what type of cells we'd be or become whatever pathogenetic later strain. May all Christendom remember them. And genuflect, as Beck might do, at the loss of even one plectrum from the shark's smile biting into the chrome of a mic stand. You may think I meant Jeff. I didn't. No one did. The strobes and engrams have an effect. I have to check the messages in case, I disappear. I've done something with the technology. I've fallen out the window. And I'm just expecting disaster to occur. Hopefully I'm still here and you're all still there out in the world, being keeping yourselves safe and sane, and maybe feeling a little bit better about things after Andrew saved the world. Not Andrew. Georgia. Why didn't you read Georgia? Andrew has a poem called Georgia. Anyway, enough thinking about other things. A short lyric poem in medias res and ekphrastic. So you all know the poem. David's Marat recently dead in the bath. Like David's Marat, swanning a little too whitely over the lip of his tub, the lip curls gallically, pouting tiger lily, as the steam leaves, last wisps, asps of breath he tries sucking back in defiance of the utensil so recently sticking out of him. And what is it about his head? Right, cropped close, a shower cap. Is a quill drifting loose from his fist? A thought is a hard thing to hold, even in a mouth as open as... For the poets out there, well, trade secrets. If you can't finish a poem, M dash. Don't even bother with the full stop. Stop at mid-thought. By torchlight through a ventilation brick. Samuel Taylor Coleridge. I'm a big Coleridge fan, maybe not even so much for his poetry, but for the mind that the poor old man had. Just a fascinating character, and Richard Holmes' biography is a 2-volume biography. It's a brilliant biography. Anyway, a couple of years ago, in Highgate in London, a bit of construction was happening in the basement of a church. Moved some rubble aside, and there was just enough space in the breeze block to shine flashlight in, and there's Coleridge and his family in leaden caskets. So they found Coleridge in a wine cellar, bricked up behind the wall, with his wife Sarah and his daughter Sarah, her husband, and a grandson, Hartley elsewhere. So that's the bit where the poem started, and then of course turns out this church is within sight, just across the road, within sight of a house where Coleridge had lived with his dealer while alive, and now, of course, is owned and occupied by Kate Moss, because that's how the world goes. By torchlight through a ventilation brick. And do you then see how exploding transformers express an irregular division of what sky is still visible? And then at the blue-white spectrum end, do you see the lamp black on metal, shadow on hinge and plate, the vestigial print of unseen power? 1348 saw an island's inhabitants reduced by half their number. It would appear the earth took back every other soul that stood, just clawed them back and left a stench. First to see the folly of the forced march was a horse of the soldier of the Grande Armée. MIT saw an opportunity, so took it. The computers kick on, tasking away, ever doubling, gunning for the quantum state. And we see how the shafts fall across lead, striping the eternal crypts in O'Reillyan metaphysic, discrete and geometric. Objects goofily decoupled, presented axonometrically, smelling nasturtium and damp brick. The lesser Sarah, as long and as wide as the rediscovered patriarch, walled off in a wine cellar. What family demands is rediscovery, or license to haunt, deploying a semantic lever the rest of us live poorly on. A supermodel saw the forest green of the surface structure's entrance from her window's window, the glassine sparkle in piled aggregate, the slack spring of the rat's body, the divinity's infinite grudge, wet holly, the blood of cooked intake and sorrow. Oh, 40 minutes. So am I over time? I'm going to finish with a quick one, 2-minute poem. I mentioned my love Helen a little bit earlier, and this is kind of a sweet poem because early on, as we were getting to know each other, she's English, lives in London, comes from the Midlands, but as we were getting started, we were talking about our past, obviously, and it turned out we were both on a beach in Dorset in the summer of 1976. So we're not sure of the weeks, but we like to, of course, believe that we were standing a few feet away as little kids with plastic buckets, because why wouldn't we? But you all know the beach is the beach in Broadchurch. That fantastic crime program, and those two brilliant actors standing Yeah, anyway, it's that beach with the cliffs. It's called Swanage Beach. The poem is called Velodrome. Oh, I'll read it for you, Andrew. You're a cyclist, aren't you? It's called Velodrome. We're not out yet, but we're going to be. I like the buzz through the bottom lip on my Garneau saying Velodrome, whether I'm in one or not, which I never am. So then say easement spiral for a current through the tongue's tip while in a track stand. Then might sprint past super elevation to catch residuals from both while pretending I've no brakes, but quads of bagged cement, head a frozen teardrop suspended from the dark disc wheels, Mydriatic stare, a spike of gravity, cyborg's axis, reinforcing pedal clips saying centripetal out one side of the mouth. In Dorset's desert of 76, I came home over baked earth from the Kimmeridge ledges and turned on the Tomorrow People, bled inside to be Tomorrow People, and entrusted with a jaunting belt. My happiness has always needed a screen onto which its forms can be cast as ghosts. Water coughed out of the faucets, silted. I stared at a cricket bat. I could hear a girl older than me in the angular shade of blistering change huts under the cliff at Swanage Beach, crying in her suit, sandals, for a future she'd not yet seen as it circled the day from prior to those she'd logged, lapping itself now and coming no closer to conclusion or restart or reason, just crying then, as we do on days when we've ourselves to be with at the sea. I could hear her. She could hear the zenith's channel knob chug over and forcefully click. Thank you to everyone for listening. And
I'm back. Well done, Ken. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's another one of my favorites. I love that. That's the ending poem in the book. Yeah, so I'm gonna kick off a short conversation here, and of course, if you have any questions back at home, please drop them in the chat or the Q&A. We'll get to those later. Yeah, so my first question was just going to be about the editing process. It's a funny story because I sent Ken the final edits, and there was dead silence for a month and a half, and I got this text from Ken. Random text that said, "I'm burning you an effigy, Matt. Ha 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 ha." There wasn't a lot of mirth in those ha's. I'm not really sure what spurred that, but I think I do a little bit because I felt the same way when you get your book back after that first pass of edits. There's sort of that gap between intention and reception of a poem. So my question for you, Ken, is if you could talk a little about that. How much, like on a scale of 1 to 10, do you care that what you're trying to get at with a poem is gotten?
Oh, of course, yeah, of course I care. But the only way I feel as though I'm fairly confident in saying this, that the only way of getting anywhere near knowing, and you will never completely know, but the only way of getting near knowing that the intended poem has arrived in some version of itself that you're okay with is by exactly what is it called? Third-party epistemology. Like I need to hear from an editor, a couple of friends, a close reader. I need to collect a few receptions of the poem in order to start hearing the echoes and reverberation. It'll be because in its traveling over, it's going to leave its initial intentions anyway, but trying to make a thing that carries some of what I had intended with it while hearing what is being received at the other end. Yeah, I absolutely need that. And then I end up settling and becoming happy with something created in the interstices between. I don't know if that if you've had the same experience, Andrew.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that does ring a bell. I mean, what I remember about the editing process for the previous book with Alana was just aside from having to change the American spellings to Canadian spellings, was just the sheer embarrassment on my part at the number of words I had repeated in my book. Words like color, because they had to be changed from COLOR to COLOUR. Each time that occurred in the manuscript, which turned out to have been too many times, Alana would kindly put a little post-it note there for me, and it made me make some resolutions about the poems that I might write in the future and the kinds of words that might not make their way into them. But when it comes to the reception of a work, I mean, I think one thing that I would sort of qualify my own work by saying is that I'm not really sure what the intention of my poems are as they're kind of on their way out, which isn't to say, I don't want to be too mystical about it or something, that I'm just moving furniture around in the room, like Spicer says, and waiting for the voices from the other side of the radio channel to kind of pass through me or something. It's not that unintentional, but I think maybe like you, I sort of find out what the poems are about once they appear in some external or exterior format. So it may be something that an editor says, it may be something that a reader says to me. It may also just most of the time be very simply seeing the thing living on another paper wall somewhere that's not my computer screen, that's not my office, that's not my head really. And there's a kind of wonderful estranging effect of seeing your poem in a magazine, for example. I'm a deep believer in sort of magazine publication as a mode in the process of kind of editing. I mean, I wouldn't just send whatever out, but I often change work when it comes back from a journal because it's been in conversation with a poem to its left and a poem to its right, and somehow it needs to belong in these worlds in a different way. I mean, I think for me, maybe the paradigm, passé as it is by now, I've always thought about what Blanchot said about kind of the work and the book, that for the time that a writer is putting something together, he or she is working on something that's a kind of pre-lingual secret, inchoate and inarticulate as it may be. And then once it gets committed to language, it's inevitably becomes immediately a public thing. Language is a public phenomenon, and it turns into a book, and then it exists for anybody but the person who put it out there. And that's not an unfortunate fact of writing books that, we have to like turn them over to other people to misread or not read at all. It's a kind of, it's an inflection point in the process of making work. And so, yeah, I sort of, that's a delicate moment, when the review comes back or the review doesn't come back, or the kind but disingenuous comments from family members who tried but didn't actually finish reading the book. In my case, they're all still walking around upstairs. There's a lot invested in it. But I would say that if I don't have an intention, like an authorial intention behind the work, it is always very intentioned in the sense that, I mean, like both of you, like all of us listening who write poems, it's a very deliberate way of living, to quote Thoreau going out to the pond. And so I guess the bare minimum I like to think that the poems ask is that they be treated with a similar sense of like intentionality. And I say that not just as a writer who, wishes that people would listen harder when they read my poems, but above all, I read poems, and I remind myself constantly as a reader and as a teacher of other readers that you need to slow down to read this book, or you need to sit up straighter to read this book. This may not be the book for the couch or the subway. It may be, but it may not be. And so understanding that someone intentioned this work into the world, I think, is an important kind of ethical way of being as a reader.
I wonder if I could pull back a bit, just when we're talking about poems, talking about whole books, and I want to maybe contextualize Swivelmount a little bit, and feel free to disagree with this, Ken. But I see it sort of as an unintentional trilogy with Airstream and Methodist, and I have exhibits here, exhibits A through D. As you can see, there's 4 books here, and it's a trilogy because, as Andrew mentioned, On Malice and the Mechanics of It, of the found poems sort of makes it a spin-off in the Marvel universe, if you know what I mean. I see Airstream as sort of a break with what became before, philosophy of consciousness, kind of talking to yourself, trying to think yourself into existence almost. Methodist is making those steps out into considering the others a little bit more. Again, these are broad strokes. There's this quote in Russian Doctor where the narrator says, the problem of being with others might resolve itself gently. It's like a little hope of the narrator that things will resolve themselves. So my question to you, Ken, is, I see a more expansiveness in Swivelmount. Just again, a little bit more breadth involved. With Swivelmount, has the problem of others resolved itself in some way? And what's with the title anyway?
I could talk about the title for a while. First of all, it's because you nixed the first title. But I think that was the right decision. I had sort of settled on an earlier title, but now, my God, now that the book is done and has the title it has, thank you so much for standing your ground and saying, So this title, I don't know. When I landed on the word Swivelmount, I'm not sure that I immediately had this image in my head, but I've remembered it since, about being in a hotel room in Scotland. I believe I was in Scotland, and it was sort of early evening, and I think I was just trying to get over jet lag. I think I had just arrived and was laying on a made bed and kind of turned my head out the window. And everyone knows the UK is kind of covered in CCTV cameras. They're everywhere. And so immediately out the window was a CCTV camera, maybe two, and they were covering the intersection of traffic, doing their business, kind of moving robotically. And then suddenly this one paused, and it swiveled up and stared straight up in the sky for a moment, and then it lowered again, and then swiveled and looked straight in the window at it. And just stared at me in the hotel room. Gaze. So that image came back to me. So I think now that sounds very, again, solipsistic or inward or something. But this book, having come from On Malice, that was very explicitly obsessed with surveillance, corporate and private sector, corporate, state, interpersonal, personal. So the surveillance was kind of seeping out its edges, and it itself was a kind of a crisis book, almost trying to write my own lyric self out of existence. And then after On Malice, I went a few years without writing anything. And so this book, I think, was a kind of a coming to terms. I won't ever leave the self. There is no such thing as writing the self out of existence, and therefore you'd better embed yourself in the others, and that means objects, people, things, beasts, so there's an attempt, at least I think in this book there's an attempt at an acceptance of both the body and the body in amongst others. And a nice side note, because my partner's a historian and works in medieval period, once we landed on Swivelmount, she of course went up and looked the roots of the word, and apparently swive, middle or old English is the verb to fuck. So there's a lovely, like, unintentional, I'm speaking of unintentional, you land on something and it seems kind of mechanical. I'm using this little pivot mount that means something to me. But the poems themselves, they show more of the human, the embodied, the fallible body, and acceptance of love and death and that kind of thing. And turns out there's a root in the title as well.
It's funny because I actually, there's a question for both of you, because things are big in both your work, right? So Ken doesn't just have Puma sneakers; he has Puma Daglish silvers, right? And that wonderful pen ink, I can't even pronounce this, Königsbleu, Roller, and Klinger fountain pen ink, which is very, very specific. And of course, Andrew has, Favril glass, Keshi pearls, and I'm going to borrow actually a title of Andrew's sonnet, The Radical Sympathy of Material Things. Is there a poetry in specificity? Like, it's almost fetishistic in some ways, but there's that gap in what we know other people know about something, that gives us a little thrill. I wonder if you could both talk to the things in your poem.
Andrew, you start.
Yeah, I'll be happy to start. Although one thing I wanted to throw back over to Ken, maybe just, if not as a question, then an observation. The title Swivelmount, and I remember when the book had a different title when it was in manuscript form, but one of the things that title did for me as I ran back around the book today in its final form was put me in mind of just how many, you and I share a fascination with certain kinds of technology, I think, and there's all kinds of materials in this book. I'm thinking of the poem Edge, which I might have read this evening. I'm thinking about the beginning of Peak Spader, which is a really funny poem. And I'm thinking about this moment and I don't read German, but Die Schwitzermaschine, where you say, I've lost my midweight copper wire, so the present lies unbuilt, unused. There's kind of all sorts of attention in here to like the machinery of everyday life in a way. And I guess in that latter moment that I quoted, it's a little bit allegorical for a second, but often it's straight up kind of materialist, actually. And there's a great attention hearing you describe that swivel mount camera, which I hadn't heard you talk about before. You seem very attuned in this book to like the stuff that makes other stuff. In its precision. And as Matthew was just saying, these things come with like really hyper-specific names. A pneumatic drill's bit is carbon alloy with a hexagonal fit. The oxygen ions in corundum form a close-packed hexagonal lattice, tough, abrasive, amphoteric. Aloxite holds fracked rock. I mean, these are words that are on the edge of vocabulary. And I love them for that because I have to go to the dictionary or Google them, and they send me into a rabbit hole, not at Lowe's or Home Depot, but of sort of like hyper-specific industries, that you found like the le mot juste, but about something materialist.
And I think of myself as a materialist in training. I mean, I want so very desperately to be full-on hardcore materialist philosophically. A naturalist, a hardcore materialist. I come from, I was born into a religious family, and so if one, I guess my own internal machinery is trying to scrape away any transcendentalist, and philosophically, I'm aligned definitely with materialist outlook on the universe, and so that's to say that language maybe is a kind of a portal into attention to matter, to think, the things that are there. I don't know how many times I've said to friends, I wish I knew the names of that tree. So you live amongst things, but you cannot talk to, about, or with them until you grab onto them in the closest way you know how, which is by language. And so, for instance, with Edge, I started thinking about having worked with a pneumatic drill and hardness and edges, but then went and started finding all of the interlocking structural things, like the molecular structure of carbon has hexagonal things about it that fit with the actual drill bit that goes into the pneumatic drill. So it was just all interlocking patterns that are out there in the world. And what is poetry other than looking for pattern in language? And so I do love getting excited. Well, this is obvious. I do love getting excited about language because I'm a poet. But it's the uncovering that language does in the world. Yeah, it uncovers the world to go chasing after it. Which I guess I'm just saying that's to admit that kind of diction, that kind of vocabulary, doesn't sit in my head. It's not a bank of vast knowledge. It's about getting excited about what I don't know and go looking for it. And language seems to pull some of the veil back on the world, on things and matter. Yeah.
I feel very close to that, Matthew. I mean, and Ken, I do. The words for some of these things are wonderful in their user unfriendliness sometimes. Often they're brand names, so I feel ambivalent about whether to include them or not. Although, as we know, brand names frequently become the common name for the thing, like a Kleenex or whatever. But they're often foreign words. They're often neologisms or kind of creative spellings of verbs that they're meant to kind of, act on. And as specificity goes, one of the things that I love most about like hyper-specific vocabularies is not just attention to detail and kind of like doing your due diligence and making sure you kind of know finally whereof you speak, but there's an estranging effect in that too. There's a way in which, so like my book is filled with runway signage and sort of call signs, and I'm an absolute graffiti chaser. You know, I've been writing about French graffiti for years now, and I think one of the things I love about graffiti, aside from the vandalism and the middle finger at the state and the repurposing of public space and lots of other things that it does, is that even when you're sort of in the know, as I've been at various points about who did this or like what neighborhoods they tend, this crew tends to hit, the hyper-specificity of that kind of immediately dissolves into abstraction when you realize that you don't have a kind of general vocabulary for it. And so like there's almost like a pull focus effect where you're so honed in on the meticulous detail regarding a technology or a call sign or a runway sign, like the pilot, who's driving the plane, or the person who's coming out to meet the plane, they know what 413 AR means, which I just took verbatim, if you can say that, from a runway I was sitting on. And I see that it's a hyper-specific warning or traffic signal or whatever that thing does that makes the runway work. But in its like specificity, I have no idea what that means. It's like giving me a date with no year to it. You can say, oh, it's June 23rd, but if there's no year attached to it, it's actually useless information. And so I think one of the things that I get kind of fascinated by out in the world, whether it's like signage or just other pieces of language that appear in the world that I want to like reuse in a poem, is the ways in which they kind of pull me in and also keep me at a distance about their utility or their function. Like you said, I don't come to this with like a mastery of, let's say, gemstones, and I can just deploy it. I mean, I find myself finding out about it. And that excavation process is one of the many ways that a poem keeps my attention.
Yeah, that actually, the idea of acquiring the language that to a certain depth is interesting, because I noticed in both your books, and maybe we can start with you, Andrew, that this is the sons and daughters question, right? So you have two daughters, I believe, and Ken's son, and they appear in your new works quite a bit. And you're writing a lot about your language, your daughter acquiring language. So the question is going to be, how has your work changed since becoming a parent? And I'm thinking less about, well, I don't have to write at 5 a.m. because I'm so tired or whatever, but more about as they grow up and they acquire language, and then you project them reading your work. They're also reading you as people now and seeing you as humans, as parents rather than just, providers or whatever. How has your work changed since becoming a parent?
Yeah, I was thinking just the other day with the election on around the house, my 10-year-old's going to remember this. I mean, I have some earliest memories at about age 9 or 10, political memories, television political memories. I had a doctoral student named Andy Frazee, who's a good poet, a really good poet. He lives in Atlanta now, who wrote a dissertation under me, one of the first ones I supervised when I got to University of Georgia. And it was about signal to noise ratios in contemporary American poetry or modern American poetry. And, it was a very wonky dissertation in its way, as they all are. And so signal to noise ratio came to be understood in its sort of, technological audio-visual way. But one of the things I remember about that, and this is by way of answering your question about like my kids and the way they do or don't make their way into the book, is Andy's idea was that poets have kinds of things that they let into their poems and things they don't. You know, I mean, and there's a kind of more sophisticated way of talking about that than just saying like, I like to write about landscape, but I don't like to write about, you know, other books or something. There's a way in which each of us, and it's always changing, and we're probably challenging ourselves, I hope, to kind of mess with those filters, but that poets have certain kinds of input that they allow in, like without which they don't think it's a poem. And other kinds of input that they won't let in because it seems to somehow ruin the poem, or it doesn't give them the atmospherics they want, or it doesn't, you know, the output is going to be tainted by it in some way. And for a long time, the kind of like baldly interpersonal interaction of myself with anybody else was just kind of verboten for a poem. And I had kind of ideological rationales behind that. I sort of still stand by them. I love the idea of not being at the center of my own poems. I don't think I'm very interesting, and I don't know why I would be at the center of them. But also my kids are not me. And so when there was one of them and then two of them, and they, lo and behold, started making noise, and then some of the noise started making sense, I had honestly a kind of decision on my plate. Like they're gonna come into the poems or they're not. And if they're not going to come in, like at what price? This is my life now, you know, and it's not a life I regret whatsoever. And soon, even as I was kind of hesitating or tergiversating about what to do about that, like there was just no way of keeping them out. And the way Ella makes her way in to the book is really not about her presence as a person in my house, or who, as you say, kind of has readjusted my life in its quotidian activities, but she's a kind of speaker box, you know, and maybe she was in some ways a more interesting speaker box when she didn't do it very well. And she's interesting as a more sophisticated speaker now, but less interesting for the poems maybe. And along with that came a certain kind of humor and a certain kind of maybe levity and a certain kind of admission that like, there are things I can't control. You know, the levity that goes along with like puke on your shoulder when you burp somebody.
Yeah.
You know, the me before all of that had no room for that in a poem because that just reeked of sentimentalia, and I wasn't going to write poems about my own grandparents. And it was actually my father who called me when we were in the hospital when Ella was born. He said, "You should write a poem about Ella," you know? And I was like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. I'll never be caught dead doing that, you know? And then
Andrew can be hired for weddings and funerals. And,
yeah, that's what other people write poems for. Big events. I'm not doing that.
But, you know, I started casting around for permission in a way. And what did I find? I found Michael Palmer's poems for his daughter, Sarah, that he would write on kind of birthdays. They were like hidden occasional poems, you know, in the otherwise serious and sobering work of one of my favorite poets of all time. And I would find, you know, John Donne's sonnets for his lover, forget Shakespeare's sonnets. Or I would find C.S. Giscombe writing about his daughter in his prose book, Into and Out of Dislocation, with a kind of ease in a way that didn't belie what I saw as the important vectors that had to do with race and geography and transport and so on. And I thought, somehow I just started kind of looking for other admired figures, contemporary or otherwise, who had made other voices, and specifically the other voices of children, part of their poetic DNA, you know, and then it started to feel okay.
It kind of reminds me of Samuel, or the narrator's son, in the poem, that one of the last images from Swivelmount is that big dab that he does in the prow of the, which is another way of like, I don't know how much, obviously some of the language that he adopts in is not necessarily of a 12-year-old, but how did you approach writing Sam in that poem, or just in general in the book, because he makes other appearances?
It was fairly, well, what's the right word? There was a shift bodily, ontologically. I'm not sure, because not to sound too dramatic or anything, I am sort of without memory of my own childhood. I have maybe 4 moments that I can remember between, you know, 3 and 12 or something, and it's just a vast black. I'm not sure what happened during those years, but I have no memory of being a child, really. and so yeah, being a father, having a young one grow up in front of me changed what I had previously kind of my natural orientation toward childhood, toward their bodies going through time, and what they can learn to do, and what time is happening, what's happening with time around them, and it was a purely joyful kind of watching him grow up and knowing that he will remember what he will and what he won't and whatnot, but it reoriented me to time and innocence and the body in time, the body in the world, and so and just being in awe of well, like Andrew said about learning language, but even learning anything, learning to walk. My son was outrageously static physically as a young one. It was almost like he resisted walking, standing up, moving, anything. He just wanted to sit and look for as long as he possibly could. And then finally, he decided, okay, I'll walk. And now he's 12 and playing competitive soccer and kind of bossing the midfield like a beast. And so watching this body go from no, I will not engage in the world to suddenly knowing itself proprioceptively in such an advanced way, it's just sort of mind-boggling. So it reoriented me toward the kind of joy and learning, and all the world comes at you. I don't want to use a cliche, but watching the world come at him sort of day after day, and seeing him just swim through it really changed how I think about time and entering the world. And the future is another thing altogether, but
well, the future and the present, another thing I'd like to add is, and I've never felt it, of course, as acutely as I have over the past 9 months, but kids are deeply political. I mean, we're capable of politicizing everything in this country, but your kids in an environment, whether in a pandemic or in a borderline fascist state or not, the decisions that they make and the decisions that you make for them are kind of, they impinge on your political life at every turn. It's like really hard to go out the door or send them out the door, forget worrying about their safety when they cross the street, worrying about their safety in a masked or unmasked room, worrying about the kinds of information they're getting from a history class or not getting from a history class. And so in a way, the kind of decision I said I had to make at one point became a moot point because children as extensions of one's own body in the world are immediately kind of circumscribed by other kinds of ideologies. And so when I'm looking on Instagram and looking at the way that in my case, young women present themselves, what's kind of a new normal about self-presentation. I mean, there's just loads and loads of ways in which I'm not paranoid, but I'm hyper vigilant about the specific kinds of traps that this world at this moment holds for. Because you mentioned the body, I mean, I'm conscious that my kids are daughters, and that's no small thing to be on the sort of lookout for. So that's, as I wrote this summer, for example, those were the kinds of concerns that I think impinging is probably the right word, that were just couldn't stay out of the poems because there was no so-called interior life of my own that didn't have that going on sort of in the forefront of its, expositions.
I'm wary of time here a little bit. We're a little bit over, but there are a couple of questions in the Q&A. Just want to get to those. This one is from Dom. Do you feel like your poems sort of lose their shine, lose their newness as you go through the editing process? And how do you keep trusting that they'll surprise the reader, even as they stop surprising you?
Oh, that's tricky, but I just keep, actually keep growing more and more invested in the editorial process. And in fact, maybe there's a bit of a buzz. A handful of the poems that I thought, oh, nailed that first try. Maybe there's a bit of a buzz around that goes away. But wow, watching the thing bounce back and forth between a mind like Matt's and my own, you know, and then one or two other friends that look at David O'Mara and Karen Soley and Helen. And so watching them engage with the poem, hearing whatever's said, and then watching the poem get, it begins to know itself in the round. And I stop having to be confident about it or something. The poem itself becomes self-aware because it's confronted other minds, and I've grown to love that more than any sense of sort of having something needed out of me by through the editorial process. But it's a good question. I know that sense. I mean, like Matt said, I'm burning an effigy of you, but that's like the gap where I'm assimilating Matt's mind, you know, his notes on the poems takes a while, but then when I realized, everything he said has, you know, 5 more facets of it that could be considered. So it's almost like folding minds into your own, and I begin to trust the poems more after they've been wandered through some really engaged readers. You know, I don't know. It's a good question. What went into choosing the cover art? You know what? Pure accident. Twitter. There's just a fantastic Twitter feed. A guy named Sardonicus in the UK is just one of those Twitter feeds. He's just constantly posting fantastic, well, a little bit on the dark side, a little bit gothic, a little bit aged, aged as in historical a little bit, but just this constant feed of images. And I grabbed this and then asked him what it was, where it came from. Turns out it's just a 100-year-old postcard from Saint-Malo in France. It's a chain winch bridge ferry. Is that the right word? Humans get in the top of it, so that's an image of it at low tide. But if you can imagine the sea all the way up to the bottom of that cabin, and people standing in there being winched over across the bay to the other holiday resort or whatever. So that's and then Eric Belling, who's a brilliant architect, designer. He's just a mind. We talked about a number of times, and it was his stroke of genius to flip it upside down, invert it. Anyway, so the image has been manipulated a bit, but I grabbed it off Twitter. It's just an old postcard, and then it was handed over to oh my God, so many names. Names Crystal at Coach House, who did the entire design with the text and my God, thank you, Crystal, because I've never been happier with a cover, really. We went looking for the color green that best represents the 4th horse of the apocalypse, chloros, which the Greek word means either no color or white, or clear white green, or clear green, or light green, or heavy green, or green blue, the color of a corpse. Anyway, so it's an ambiguous signifier for a color, but we were going after a plaguey death color. It turns out, who knew? Plaguey.
Little dark. It's a little dark. That's great, guys. Thanks so much for this conversation. It's been great. I think we're sort of out of time, but again, congratulations to Ken. And I should mention also that if you use the code Swivelmount, you get 20% off both mine, Andrew's, and Ken's new book. Use it in the next 24 hours at chbooks.com. Okay, guys, thanks so much. Congrats, Ken.
Thank you to everybody out there who might have been listening. I so appreciate it. And Andrew and Matt. And, yeah.
Thanks, everyone, for coming, and congrats, Ken.
Thank you, Andrew.
All right, bye, guys.